Right. I was going to talk about getting the most out of your first conference. I think the first thing is, what's the purpose of attending a conference? And I suppose the obvious perception we all have is that we go to listen to the presentations and learn about our discipline, our area of research from them. And usually conferences are marketed in this way, or at least a lot of weight is put on how much you'll learn by attending a conference. In practice, people go to conferences for lots of different reasons. North America, in particular, conferences are tax deductible. Medical conferences tend to be very expensive places, very beautiful places, often in the Caribbean. People can go, take their partner with them, and have a nice holiday and go to a conference. And they might not go if it wasn't a nice place and if it wasn't tax deductible. Some research organizations I know don't allow you to go to a conference. They won't pay. They say, well, if it's any good, you'll read about the presentation later when it's published, and then you'll know it's good. In conferences nowadays, really big ones are often promoted by tourist boards that want a few thousand people to come to their town, spend a week there, spend lots of money, use the hotels and so on. Conferences can be enormous, 3,000 or 4,000 people, in some cases in North America at least, and they're really expensive to attend, and so you're unlikely to get the chance if you're a young academic. Some young academics get a chance because they're a well-funded university or they've won a prize, but it's relatively unusual. The main reason you probably want to go to a conference, or should want to go to a conference, is to socialize. You get to know other people in your discipline. You get to know other people doing similar research to you. So we call it networking, basically making friends among your colleagues. Colleagues who share your interests, you can learn from them and they can learn from you. Now, whether you go to a conference or not, that's going to happen in life. You will meet people who are interested in your research, you're interested in their research. You may end up publishing something together, helping one another, or you've at least met them, and if you may get a chance to meet some big name that you've read about. Getting to know people is really important, whether you're a plumber or whether you're a pharmacist, whatever your profession, your job in life, it's nice to know other people who are in the same line of work, because things that you think are major problems and you're the only person with that problem, you soon discover everyone else has got the same problem. So you can support one another in your work, you can lean on one another, and if the person's got more experience, that can be very useful too, because you can learn fast by listening to them, or if they can give you a helping hand. So as you get older, you inevitably know more people. You will know more people that can help you, but getting to know these people early on can be a big advantage. Now, conferences are a great way to get to know people. They're a social event. There'll be very few conferences that don't have a sort of meet and greet function. There's tea, coffee, alcohol, snacks, where you just circulate and get to know these people. That's really just the same as going to a golf club or going to a tennis club, or any athletics group, going to the gym. People go supposedly to exercise, but they also get a chance to meet people with similar interests. So there's absolutely no harm in it, and there's a lot of potential good in it. You want to be seen, you want to be recognized, and these people want exactly the same. Now, the word networking is kind of modern, and it's not what appeals to me particularly, but it's really just making friends with people who will be useful to you, but you will be useful to them. You have shared interests, and therefore you can help one another. So developing professional links for anyone is a good idea. One of the best ways of meeting or having an excuse to introduce you to someone, or for them to approach you, is by making a presentation. There will be a lot of conferences where you're not allowed to attend unless you're making a presentation. Most universities I've been at, they won't give you any funding to attend a conference unless you're making a presentation. So you make a presentation, there'll be questions from the audience. Usually that means you get to know people who are interested in what you're doing. You can speak to them afterwards, or they may come up and speak to you. So just saying, guess who I am, what country I come from, is not a very good way to make friends. But if you've got something in common, it's easier. Now, if you don't make a presentation, you can still speak to people and say, I'm working in such and such an area, or I read your paper on such and such. I'd like to discuss it with you. Most people are flattered. Most people like to think people have read what they've done or have heard of them. It's not easy walking up. For most people, it's not easy walking up to a stranger and saying, I'd like to chat to you. So you need to have some, or it's easier if you've got some sort of excuse. Your excuse, it's not an excuse, your reason is the research you're doing, the research you're interested in. You too can ask questions at sessions. So if you listen to someone and you don't understand something, you can ask, could you explain the point you made about this or a point you made about that? And it's not easy doing that for most of us, because most of us are a wee bit shy, but it works. And you need to grab the opportunity. Most people are friendly. Now, you will find some people who, in your own discipline, are not necessarily very friendly, but they are rare. Most people really are pretty kind and want to help. One way of doing it, if you can, is to go in a group to a conference, so you've got support from your friends. Some supervisors will take students with them to a conference and introduce them to people. That's probably the easiest way to do it. But most people are happy to talk to you and will be very supportive of you. It's worth doing a bit of preparation before you go to conference. Thinking, I'm going to have to speak to people. They might speak to me. What do I need to prepare? Well, if you're giving a paper, giving a presentation, that's what you prepare. But someone at some point is going to say to you, what's your thesis? You tell them you're doing your PhD or your master's or whatever, and somebody's going to say, well, what's that about? But they don't really want to listen to the next half hour from you. So I think any student who's really on top of their PhD should be able to say in one sentence what the guts of the PhD is. It's not something that you automatically can say. But it's really handy if you can say, well, I'm looking at this because of this. And that will get them talking. Or if you see, oh, so-and-so's going to the conference, so-and-so's going, look at what they've written on the internet, and have a look at the paper and say, gee, that's interesting. That fits in with what I'm interested in. Then you can say to them, well, I read your paper on such and such. But they'll be thrilled to bits. If you say that, whoever they are, they'll be pleased. You're flattering them. And then say, can you explain how you went about doing this? But you're just building a relationship with people. But a little bit of preparation is useful, because otherwise if you are nervous, you're probably not going to say a word. And that's a bit of a waste. Right, there's probably quite a lot of you who can't get money to go to conference. Certainly can't get money to go to a big international conference. And these days, you probably can't get an air ticket to go to the conference anyway because of COVID. But no reason to panic. Networking, we've been talking about getting to know your colleagues, getting to know them internationally. You don't have to go to a conference. Conference is a really good way of doing it, but it's not the only way of doing it. There's a real risk in going to every conference under the sun if you've got the money, but never communicating. But there's an even bigger risk that I've come across in North America particularly, is communicating all over the world, but not communicating with the people along your corridor. And I used to work in science policy for a long time, and we would say, have you got any links with such and such university? Say, oh, yes, yes. And it'd be a 5-hour flight away, and they'd be very proud of their links across Canada. And then you say, have you spoken to Professor so-and-so? I've never heard of him. And this has actually happened to me. It was at Toronto. He was just down the corridor. He was in a different discipline. So they didn't read any of his stuff, even though it was bang in line with the research they were doing. So a really good way to start learning how to build relationships with colleagues is actually to speak to the one you've got in the same building, down the corridor, suggesting you have a coffee together or a cup of tea, a glass of water, whatever. Going to them for advice. Now your supervisor will be advising in your PhD, but most of his colleagues or her colleagues can also give you advice, and you should get to know them. And again, you build up a network of people you can trust, that you can lean on. You can use emails to contact people. If you've read a paper that you think, this is bang in line with what I'm doing, but I don't understand his sampling, or I don't understand her interview technique, or I wonder how she would deal with the problem I'm dealing with. There's nothing to stop you sending an email. Most people will reply to emails. Again, they'll be pleased you've contacted them. They may not reply. They may be too busy. They may be away for some reason, but usually they will reply, and they'll be pleased to reply, and they'll be pleased to help. So even without being able to afford to go to a conference or having the time to go to a conference, you can still network, and it's worth doing that. I think the other thing is to remember that different disciplines have different attitudes to conferences. I'm a geographer. In general, I think geographers go to conferences to get a holiday and to meet their friends. And there's no harm in that, because you're all interested in your research, it's your job. And so you'll end up talking about work even by mistake. Other people will go to conferences for different reasons. They go to conference because they want a job other than the one they've got. And this gives them a chance to show other people in different countries, different universities, how clever they are or what they're interested in. There'll be other people going because they happen to be in a different country, and they'll go to that conference at the same time. But people do go for very different reasons. And there's not necessarily any problem with that. And that will vary with discipline. I said to Craig before, there's a paper some years ago of how people dress to go to conferences, and it said you can always tell a geologist, because they'll turn up in a check shirt, big boots. They look as if they've just come in from the field. They've probably never been in the field in their life. They spend their life looking down a microscope, but they want to look like a geologist. If you go to managers at business school, they will probably be the best dressed people that you'll ever see at a conference, because they want to look as if they fit into the world of business. And so conferences will take different forms. It also depends how much money is being spent at the conference. If it's certain conferences will get a lot of outside sponsorship and they'll have fancy dinners. Other conferences won't. So don't be put off. Conferences vary enormously around the world. It's not clear to me how conferences will continue in the next few years because of COVID. And because of COVID, lack of money in a lot of universities. And so the money to send people to conferences is going to get less. Undoubtedly, there's potential to meet people on the internet, and probably most of you do that. People like me who can't work the computer very well are not going to do that. But there are other ways of communicating. And the main thing is to think of the conference, I think, as a way of networking, getting to know people. It can be fun. You can make really good friends at conferences, and you can keep in touch for decades afterwards. But you don't have to meet them face to face, though that may be nicest way to do it. I think the bottom line is to remember that most people are decent. Some people you'll meet, you'll never want to see them again, and they may not want to see you again. But most people you meet will be happy to meet you. You will enjoy meeting them. And if they find you interesting or a pleasant person, you've made a friend for life, and that's really good. But their basic interest in you will be in your research. They may be interested where you come from, what your background is, but the conference is really, officially at least, about research. So again, I go back to have one sentence ready. I am interested in doing this. I am doing a PhD looking at this. That really is useful, and they can pick it up from there. I think the last point is really that we read about these big international conferences, but my advice would be to start small. We often don't know the people we're working in the same department with. That having a coffee with your friends or having a coffee with your colleagues and making friends is really important. There are often small workshops, seminars in your own university or at the neighboring university that are fairly easy to go to rather than flying all around the world. And they're just as useful because you meet a person at another university or who's been at another university, you're making links around the world, but you're doing it on your own doorstep. So I think it's important to realize that conferences or networking is part of being a professional. It's getting to know people, developing a security network, a bunch of people who will help you, who might write references for you in the future, might help you when you've got a problem writing or a problem doing a PhD. But if you like, it's one of the fun parts of doing a PhD, doing a degree, just getting to know people who've got similar interests to yourself. Okay.